Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Prime Minister Alan Shastny has announced that over 100 Cuban doctors and nurses will be brought to St. Lucia to help ease the strain placed on local health practitioners as the island transitions from the use of the Victoria Hospital to the Owen King EU Hospital. The incoming medical detail will also supplement the staff of the newly commissioned respiratory hospital, which will function on site of the Victoria Hospital.
I'm very pleased to announce tonight that the Minister of Health and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, along with the Cuban ambassador here, have been able to facilitate getting over 100 Cuban doctors and nurses to be able to come to St. Lucia. I also want to give a special thanks to the government of Cayman, who have generously offered to use one of their planes to fly the Cuban doctors and nurses from Cuba directly to St. Lucia.
The Prime Minister said the most dangerous threat surrounding the virus is what has been seen in other countries like Italy, where hospitals become overwhelmed to the extent that healthcare becomes increasingly difficult to deliver. The Prime Minister noted that it was never budgeted for Victoria Hospital to be operational after the transition to Owen King EU Hospital, but he says the resources have to be found.
We recognize that we are going to need a dedicated hospital to deal with the respiratory crisis that could ensue with a community outbreak. So the decision was, let's move into OKEU so that OKEU can continue to provide solutions with their basic healthcare needs, which have not gone away. And that we would now convert Victoria Hospital into a respiratory hospital. So from a financial perspective, we had never budgeted to be able to operationalize Victoria. And so we have been able to find the resources in order to be able to build out that facility.
The Prime Minister also thanked the government of the Cayman Islands, who he says have volunteered one of their planes to transport the Cuban medical team directly to St. Lucia. He says it is hoped that they will arrive by the end of this week. Women's advocate Catherine Seelys is shedding light on one of the darker consequences of the COVID-19 crisis, and she's asking the powers that be to step in to lend a much-needed hand. Seelys says the shutdown of the island has resulted in a number of abused women and children being left with no choice but to stay at home where the abuse is taking place, leaving them at high risk. She says this also applies to children who lived below the poverty line, being left hungry. There are solutions, she says, and they need to be implemented immediately. Genevieve Gonzague reports.
I was listening to what the government was putting forward and what the social services were putting forward in order to raise a little awareness on the problem of domestic violence and child sexual abuse and child abuse generally in this very critical situation. I didn't hear anything.
Women's advocate Catherine Seelys says many of the victims are very uncomfortable with the over-the-phone measure that has been put in place, and it makes it a lot more difficult to help them. She is very concerned that none of the authorities have taken into consideration abused children or women in particular.
And I'm really concerned the fact that the government of St. Lucia, through the social services, has not put out a PSA or any information regarding public education and awareness and how to protect children. They have not done that, and that concerns us quite a bit. On the matter of domestic violence, a lot of women, sometimes they're alone working. The man is abusive, but the woman is working, and now she's out of work. So the man is angry because you're not working to bring food in the house. As unjustified that is maybe, this is the situation. So now you are faced with the anger of a domestic violence abuser, and you're not at work. So you cannot go to work to escape, and you cannot go to work to bring money to pacify the situation. So the situation is quite dangerous.
Seelys says she understands that the current situation with the virus was not planned. However, she says there are enough stakeholders who can convene with the government to make decisions and suggestions when it comes to abused women, children, and marginalized people. She is hoping that the government takes heed and ensures inclusion in whatever relief plans to be implemented.
The tourism industry does not have any control over this global threat. There is no point in giving them money now. There is nothing they can do with it. However, if they decide that they're going to choose marginalized persons, although they've been marginalized people for quite a while, because the special assessments for special needs children come to mind, the fire relief fund comes to mind, they can find themselves in a position to see, we are going to support or give limited support to vulnerable groups, vulnerable population, so they may not starve in this situation.
She says the solutions to aid vulnerable people are very evident. The government just needs to take into consideration these groups in their response. Reporting for Hot 7 News, I am Genevieve Gonzague.
Now, as you heard earlier on in the broadcast, the government has imposed a curfew, which it says may be reviewed and made more stringent if it is not adhered to by the general public. We took to the streets to get your views on the 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. national curfew. Here's what you had to say.
The time they put the curfew on St. Lucia, 11 in the night to 5 in the morning, I don't think that is the right time. They should put it around like 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 5 in the morning, because they still have some St. Lucians people, they don't care. They're moving like as though when you tell them something for their own good, they still want to stick close to you, they still want to come close to you, they still want to play, they come in, they're touching you and things like that. We working in town and they have all them kind of people, like especially those people there. I don't know why they didn't move them, they put a curfew on them too, move them from there, because when we do our work in the morning, those people come in, they're spitting there, they're sneezing on people, all kind of things like that. I mean, I spoke to the mayor about it, and the mayor says it's not him. They cannot do anything about it. It's the police. So I'm asking the police to come around and do something about that, move those people on the road and make sure that if they cannot move on the road, put a fine on them, maybe like $500 or $1,000. If it's not work you come into in the morning, make them do it like Martinique. Right now in Martinique, you cannot come out just so. For you to come out, you have to sign an application form or whatever it is and have that form on you to prove that you are going to work or in the supermarket. So they should really put something like that on St. Lucia, for St. Lucia to feel how it is, to listen.
From 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they should put the curfew, going right down to 6, 7 in the night, because it will be at the benefit of the people of St. Lucia and the benefit of the government also to take it under control. And Lucians, we better understand, it's not nothing they're doing to us, you know. They're just protecting us from coming in town, that if somebody have the virus, it could spread, and either side or the other can get it and continue spreading it. So I agree for them to wait from 1 o'clock to 6, going to 7.
Why the curfew cannot work is because people are very indisciplined down there. You tell the people certain things to do, you tell them certain things that they shouldn't do, you tell them certain things that is good for them, they don't take any notice of you, because they're very indisciplined people. So curfew is not going to work. There'll always be people on the streets.
But do you feel it should have been earlier? Or the time is okay?
Whether it's earlier or later, it just won't work. It can't work because people are curious, especially Lucian people. They're very curious people. They need to see things happening. They need to, even though you tell them hell and brimstone is coming down, they'll still come out on the streets and watch to see if it's going to happen. They're curious people.
To me, it should have been earlier. It's at 11 o'clock too late. It should have been from about 5. From about 5 in the afternoon to 6 in the morning.
Do you think that it will work?
That is another problem. St. Lucians head hard.
There you go.
They head very hard. If it work, it work. If to me, I think it will work.
It's all right. It's all right to me. 11 to 5 in the morning is good. So I can't doubt it. It's good.
I don't have a problem with the time, because St. Lucians every day, they have no bed, they don't have time to sleep. All how you walk around, you're seeing people. So to me, the time is okay, because I too like to do it too. Sometimes I want to wake up in the morning and go and see what's happening in the town. So I know it's okay. The time don't really matter for me. Well, especially the workers, the people who are working in the hotels, they should bring it down to about 9-10, but I don't have a problem with it. But honestly, for people's security, they should bring it up to about 9-10.
The government of St. Lucia is being called upon to outline clearly what businesses fall under the essential and non-essential services and to ensure that all businesses are complying with the protocols. There are concerns that not everyone is adhering to the 2-week non-essential business shutdown. The Prime Minister's declaration that the country is in shutdown mode and a state of emergency, but only with a partial scaling back of business, seems to be leading to some confusion. In some cases, construction and roadworks are taking place on projects deemed of national importance. Attorney at law Thaddeus Antoine is calling on the government to clear up the confusion as it relates to essential and non-essential business.
Well, I think the government needs to clarify that point. We have under disasters different legislation as to what is considered essential services and non-essential services. But I think that has been blurred by the statements by the government. It's been blurred a bit. So I think particularly now a state of emergency has been declared, the government by the order on the state of emergency also needs to indicate what is essential service, what is non-essential services.
As per COVID-19 protocol are emergency services like fire and police and private security services, border control, utilities like Wasco, Lucelec and telecoms, sanitation collection and disposal, supermarkets, mini-marts, shops, bakeries and pharmacies, petrol and gas stations, air and seaport operations, limited public transportation services, limited banking services, trucking services related to movement and delivery of essential supplies and the food chain, restaurants and fast food services, only those who do takeaway, takeout, delivery or drive-through, news and broadcast services, manufacturing activities related to production of food, water, and products of personal hygiene, and providers of cleaning services. Antoine says there are still blurred lines and they need to be addressed with alacrity, and says authorities need to ensure that businesses are complying.
And it has been blurred because we have partial closures taking place. So one does not quite know what is essential, what is not essential. Because generally, during a disaster, a restaurant would not be considered an essential service. That just you normally think of the police, you think of the fire service, you think of emergency services, water, electricity. But a restaurant being open is generally not considered to be an essential service. But it's been considered that now, so that just shows you that the definition of essential service has been somewhat blurred.
Under COVID-19 protocol, non-essential businesses are to remain closed for 2 weeks. In his Monday night national address, Prime Minister Alan Chastanet did not beat around the bush as he called for greater public cooperation in fighting COVID-19. He lamented the disregard shown for the well-being of the greater population during recent escape attempts made by returning locals in quarantine. He urged the nation to rally together. Shaka Wooding reports.
One message dominated Prime Minister Alan Chastanet's March 23rd address to the nation, and that was the need for togetherness as the nation maneuvers the current conditions resulting from the global COVID-19 pandemic. The Prime Minister appealed to the public to take the existing threat more seriously and cease all undisciplined and selfish behaviors which could lead to community spread.
So I'm appealing to all St. Lucians, just the same way the parents of the young man who scaled the wall, his parents brought him back. And they brought him back knowing that in addition to him having to go back into quarantine, that they themselves had to go into quarantine. This is not a huge sacrifice to ask. And I keep saying to you, think of one person that you love in this country, more than anything else. And every time it becomes difficult, think of that person and what you're potentially exposing that person to. Your family members, your neighbors, and collectively to the ability of our country to make it through this process.
He underscored the strain that has now been placed on emergency personnel due to the greater need for security detail at quarantine sites.
Sadly for us, despite the fact that these individuals had been told in advance that they would be into quarantine, the disobedience that ensued put even more pressure on us. So we ended up having to put more nurses up into that operation than we had planned. And more importantly, we had to put more policemen up in that area. In fact, the SSU eventually had to be called in at the same time.
The Prime Minister said due to the challenges with keeping the borders open, there was no choice but to close them and bar all incoming flights to help prevent any more imported cases of the virus. For Hot 7 News, I am Jacqueline.
This is the Hot 7 TV Nightly News. Stay with us. There's more coming up after the break.